The snow began to fall on the same day they cast her out. It wasn't the kind of gentle snowfall that blankets the land like a lullaby. It came sharp and bitter, slashing sideways through the wind like tiny knives. The town of Black Hollow huddled beneath gray skies, its people retreating indoors, shutting their windows not just against the cold, but against her cries. Her name was Clara Wren. 25, quiet, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who once blended into the church pews and offered warm bread to neighbors with a smile too kind for her own good. She used to hum lullabies while sweeping the porch. Now she was nothing but a stain they wanted to wash away. No one came to help her gather her things. No one stopped the sheriff when he tossed her suitcase onto the dirt and said she had 10 minutes to leave town or be thrown into the river herself. No one met her eyes, not even the pastor who once blessed her marriage. She stood alone outside her cabin, her coat too thin, her hands trembling, not just from the cold, but from the sting of knowing she'd been erased, just like that, because of who she loved, because of what they saw in the child in her arms. The baby was no more than 4 months old, swaddled tight against her chest, asleep despite the wind. His skin was warm copper, and his eyes, when open, shone with the sharp almond depth of his father's people. Apache blood. A child born of the so-called enemy. They didn't shoot her that day. No, not yet. That came later. That morning they only aimed their eyes at her like daggers and spat the word traitor under their breath. The snow deepened as Clara walked. There were no horses left to her. Hers had been taken in the same silence that took her place in town. She carried her son, step by step, boots crunching over white, her eyes never leaving the horizon. She didn't cry, not when the cold bit into her face, not even when her feet bled from miles of frostbitten mud, because crying would have meant giving them one more piece of her soul. She had no destination, only a way. Away from the faces who once shared her supper table, away from the woman who used to call her sister, away from the pews where she sang hymns beside the man she loved, the same man they now called a savage, a ghost, a devil. His name was Eli Rivers. They said he rode with shadows, that he vanished into the hills like smoke, that he stole cattle and hearts in equal measure. But Clara knew the truth of him. She knew his voice when it softened, his hands when they held her, trembling not from rage, but from restraint. He was half Apache, half white, too wild for the town, too tame for the tribes, belonging to no one except her.
They met one summer in secret, at the river bend, where tall reeds whispered stories older than the town itself. He was fixing a fence. She was chasing her hat that had blown into the field. And when he handed it back, neither of them spoke for a full minute. They didn't have to. That fall, she would find herself drawn to the hills at dusk, under the excuse of berry picking. And always, somehow, he'd be there, quiet, watching, waiting. By the time she missed her moon and placed her hand over the small fluttering life inside her, Clara had already known she would choose him again, even if it meant being hunted. Now, as she trudged through the rising snow, her son pressed against her chest like a flickering flame she had to protect at all costs. Clara whispered the only name that gave her strength, Eli. But he hadn't come. Not in weeks. Not since the town found out. She didn't know where he'd gone, if he'd run, if he'd been taken, if he'd even known what they'd done to her. She just walked, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant they won. By dusk, the wind howled louder than her heartbeat. Her knees buckled once, then again. She fell beside an old sycamore tree, roots like frozen fingers stretching from the earth. She pressed her back against it, curled around the baby, and whispered lullabies through cracked lips. I'll keep you warm. Just one more night." The baby slept. Clara drifted in and out of darkness. She dreamed of him, Eli, kneeling by the fire, his face half lit, whispering to their son, "You're not half of anything. You are whole. You are love made flesh." When she awoke, it was morning, silent, blinding white. Her limbs wouldn't move. She couldn't feel her fingers, or her toes, or the baby. A scream caught in her throat, raw and silent. She tried to reach for him. Her arms wouldn't lift. Her mind shrieked while her mouth stayed frozen. Then a sound, snow shifting, a crunch of boots, a shape in the mist, tall, moving fast. Her lashes fluttered, barely parting. A figure fell to his knees beside her. Hands scraped the snow from her chest, from the baby's blanket. Strong arms, rough voice, "Eli!" Her name spoken like a prayer and a curse all at once. "Stay with me." She wanted to answer, wanted to say his name back, but the dark pulled her down again, and all she could feel was the warmth of bare hands digging through the cold.
The first thing Clara felt was heat, not fire, but warmth like the sun through cotton, low and steady. Then came the sharp scent of pine resin and saddle leather. Her eyelids twitched. Something heavy was draped over her. Fur? Wool? She heard the crackle of firewood, then the low, rhythmic murmur of a voice not speaking, but humming. It wasn't a dream. Eli was real. When her eyes finally opened, she was lying on a pile of deer pelts inside a cabin barely larger than a wagon. The window was no more than a slit in the log wall, but light poured in like honey. A small fire burned in a stone hearth nearby. The baby, her baby, was nestled in a cradle by the fire, wrapped tight in a buffalo blanket. His chest rose and fell in peace. And Eli sat on the floor beside her, legs crossed, sharpening a knife with slow, steady hands. His face was gaunt, eyes darker than before, but it was him, still him. He noticed her wakefulness without turning. "You almost didn't make it," he said. His voice was gravel and wind, worn down by weeks alone. He didn't look at her, just kept drawing the blade along the stone. She swallowed. Her throat burned. "How long?" 3 days, maybe 4. Hard to tell out here. A silence passed, one heavy with questions neither of them were ready to face. Then, softly, too softly to be pried, she asked, "You dug me out with your hands?" He nodded, still not looking. She blinked slowly. "I didn't think you knew." "I knew." His voice cracked on the second word. He stopped sharpening, set the knife aside. His shoulders rose and fell once before he finally turned to face her. They tried to hide it, the way they do when they're ashamed of something. But I knew.
Clara pushed herself up onto one elbow, pain flaring in her spine and hips. The cold had left its mark. Her toes were wrapped in cloth. Her lips still cracked, but her heart ached more than her body. "I thought maybe you'd left," she said. "I did," he answered quietly. "When I heard what they were saying about the baby, about you, I thought if I left, they'd leave you alone." Her face twisted, not in anger, but in the kind of heartbreak that doesn't scream. It simply breathes shallow. "They didn't. I know." For the first time, he moved toward her, kneeling beside the pelts. His hands, still rough with frostbite, reached toward hers but didn't touch, not yet. "I shouldn't have left," he said. "I should have stayed and fought." "No," Clara whispered. "If you'd stayed, they would have killed you."
He didn't argue, because they both knew it was true. The townsfolk had shot her through the chest, not with lead, but with exile, with hate, with silence. But Eli, if he had stayed, it wouldn't have been exile, it would have been a noose. They sat there for a long moment, the fire snapping beside them, the child asleep in the cradle. Then she said something she hadn't dared speak since that bitter morning in the snow. "Do you still want us?" His head snapped up. She wasn't asking to wound. She was asking because her whole body ached with not knowing. "You don't have to. I can—" He grabbed her hand, gently but firm. His eyes met hers with a heat that melted the rest of her words. "You were never something I had to want," he said. "You're something I never stopped wanting, even when I tried." The tears came then, not fast or loud, just one, then another, falling down her wind-chapped cheeks. He didn't wipe them. He let her cry. And when her breathing settled, he looked at the cradle. "I built that for him," he said. "Every piece. Took me days. I didn't even know if you'd live long enough to see it." Clara looked at the cradle again. It was simple, carved from pine, but every edge was smooth, every joint held with care. She reached for his hand, squeezing it softly. "He needs a name," she said. Eli nodded. "I want him to carry your name." He looked at her then, really looked. Something in his face cracked open. The silence between them shifted, no longer heavy but full of meaning. "No one's ever asked to carry my name." "I'm not asking. I'm giving it to him. To us." The snow had stopped by morning. The cabin still groaned against the cold, but inside it something had changed. Not just survival, something warmer. Belonging. That night, Clara nursed the baby while Eli chopped wood. Afterward, he boiled coffee in a blackened tin pot and sat beside her on the floor, their backs resting against the wall. She leaned into him. He didn't flinch, just rested his chin on her hair. Outside, wolves howled in the distant hills. Inside, a mother and father whispered names to their child by the firelight. Names that weren't Apache or white, just names of hope. The next day, Clara stood outside the cabin for the first time. Her legs trembled. The light was blinding, but she stood. Eli watched from the doorway, arms crossed. She turned to him, wind in her hair. "I want to go back." His brow furrowed. "Back?" "Not to them," she said. "Just back through, back to the fear, back to the place they left me. I want to stand on my own 2 feet where they buried me." He didn't try to stop her. Instead, he packed food, filled a canteen, and saddled a horse. "I'll ride beside you," he said.
They rode at dawn. Clara's legs still trembled in the stirrups, but she refused to let Eli carry her. She held her own reins. Her spine stayed straight, even when the cold made her wince, even when the scar on her shoulder ached where the bullet had grazed her. The trail back to town was covered in fresh snow, but the earth underneath still remembered. They reached the edge of town by sundown. Eli stopped first, his horse stamping nervously beneath him. Clara sat beside him, her breath trembling like smoke. From this ridge they could see everything: Main Street, the church steeple, the general store where she used to trade eggs for sugar, the house with green shutters that once belonged to her aunt, the alley where they'd kissed once at midnight under a sky full of gunfire. Her heart beat slower now, not calmer, just heavier. She looked down at the graveyard behind the chapel. "They buried me," she said, "but not in the ground." Eli said nothing. She turned to him. "Will you wait here?" "No." She gave him a long look. "I'm not riding in with you, but I won't leave." And so Clara rode in alone. The streets were almost empty. Most folks didn't go out after sundown, especially not since the last snowfall froze the water troughs and the preacher's bell cracked in two. She passed the saloon. The curtains fluttered. Someone peeked out, then vanished. She passed the store. The shutters closed. By the time she reached the square, someone had rung the old iron bell. It rang not for worship, but for warning. Clara dismounted. Her boots sank into the snow. She carried no weapon, only her baby, tucked tight against her chest in the same blanket Eli had once draped around her. The sheriff was the first to appear. He hadn't aged, still wore that star like it was armor, still walked like he owned the dirt. "Clara James," he said, "you got some damn nerve." She didn't flinch. "I came for what's mine." The sheriff spit in the snow. "Ain't nothing here for you now." Her eyes flickered to the crowd forming behind him. Shopkeepers, ranch wives, a few old miners with yellow eyes. None of them stepped forward, but none turned away either. "I buried you once," the sheriff said. "Don't make me do it again."
She stared at him. "You buried your guilt, not me." His jaw clenched. "I loved a man you didn't understand," she said, her voice calm. "Sure, that's not a crime. He's a half-blood." The word came out like poison. "And I'm a mother," she replied, "which makes me more than you'll ever be." A murmur rippled through the crowd, small, but there. Someone gasped as Eli appeared at the edge of the square. He didn't ride in, just stood, hat low, rifle slung across his back, not threatening, just present. The sheriff's eyes flickered. "He follows you like a shadow. Better a shadow than a coward in the sun." The sheriff drew his pistol. Clara didn't move. The crowd inhaled as one. But before the hammer could cock, before the metal even clicked, something happened no one expected. The old widow Campbell stepped forward. Her white gloves trembled as she reached up and pulled the pistol from the sheriff's hand. She didn't point it, just held it, then turned to Clara. "I lost my son to war, but I won't lose another child to hate." One by one, others followed. The blacksmith, the preacher's wife, even the stable boy, no more than 12, stepped in front of Clara. It wasn't a protest. It was a wall. The sheriff's face crumpled. For a moment he looked smaller than she remembered. Not a man of law, just a man afraid of love he didn't understand. He turned and walked away. Clara exhaled, then collapsed. Eli was there before anyone else, arms under her, carrying her not away, but toward the place they once called home. In the old barn where they'd carved their names into the loft beam, he laid her down gently on straw and kissed her forehead. "You came back for them," he said. "No," she whispered. "I came back for me." The baby stirred. Outside, a church bell rang, this time not in warning, but in welcome.
The town didn't speak of it the next day. That's how forgiveness worked here, quietly, without banners or applause, just fewer doors closing, just eyes meeting again, if only for a second longer than before. But something had shifted. Clara woke in the loft, beneath the same beams that still held the scratch of their initials. The barn smelled like cedar and hay. The baby slept soundly on her chest.
Outside, wind swept across the fields, carrying the scent of thawing frost and the distant rhythm of hooves. Eli had been gone since before dawn. She didn't ask where. He returned before noon. Covered in dust, jacket open, breathing hard, but eyes alive. In one hand he carried a bundle wrapped in worn canvas. In the other he held nothing, but his fingers trembled with the memory of something heavy. "What is that?" she asked. He didn't answer, just unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay her mother's shawl, the one taken from her when she was first dragged from her home. Folded carefully on top, a small leather pouch. Inside it, coins. And a ring. A wedding ring. Not hers. Eli looked up. "They left it behind when they took you. I found it buried in a box near the riverbank." She held it in her palm. Cold, but somehow familiar. "That's not mine," she said. "No," he replied. "It was your father's." A silence filled the barn, thick as summer heat. She blinked. "You went back there?" "To the cabin. What was left of it." He paused. "They burned the walls, but the roots stayed." Clara swallowed. "Why?" "Because someone needed to," he said. Later that afternoon, word spread through the town, slow at first, then faster, like wind stoking a fire. Riders were coming. Not bandits, not marshals. Riders from the Southern Valley, Apache, Kiowa, even a few Comanche. And they weren't armed. They came not with war, but with blankets, with children, with bundles of dried meat and tobacco, with quiet songs sung beneath their breath.
The townsfolk gathered, some on porches, some by fences, rifles hidden but ready. Then came the moment no one could quite understand. One of the riders, a tall man with braids silvered by age, dismounted, walked into the square. No weapons, just a staff wrapped in red cloth. He knelt before Clara. No words, only a pouch extended. Inside, a carved feather, a symbol of mourning and peace. Eli stood behind her, hands clenched, not out of anger, out of something deeper. Clara stepped forward. She took the feather. The old man rose, then looked to the baby. She gently turned, letting him see. His expression didn't change, but his eyes watered. "You are hers," he whispered, voice rough. "And she was ours." Then, in the language of his people, he spoke a name Clara didn't know, but one she felt. He said the child has her mother's fire and her father's sky. Eli translated. Tears traced Clara's cheeks. And then, without ceremony, without decree, the others dismounted. They laid gifts at the church steps, blankets, corn, soapstone carvings, little shoes made of deer hide. Children from the town stepped forward, hesitantly, then eagerly. They touched the beads, ran fingers over the soft leather, laughed. The widow Campbell offered warm cider. The preacher's wife offered towels, and someone, no one knew who, began to hum a lullaby no longer owned by one people, but shared by two. That night they lit fires in the field, not to burn, but to gather. The circle was formed, old enemies set side by side. No speeches, no apologies, just food passed hand to hand. Eli sat beside Clara, their child curled between them like a secret no longer hidden. The old Apache elder placed his hand on the boy's head. "You give him a name yet?" She hesitated. Eli said, "Not yet." The elder smiled, nodding. "Good. Names should come from living." As stars filled the sky above them, the fire cracked and whispered its own kind of forgiveness, a warmth deeper than blood, the kind that lives long after smoke fades.
Morning came slowly, as if the land itself didn't want to let the night go. Clara sat near the dying fire, the baby curled on her lap, one tiny fist tucked beneath his chin. The last embers glowed softly, as if still remembering the songs sung around them just hours before. Her shawl smelled of cedar and smoke, of something ancient and safe. Eli approached from behind, carrying 2 mugs of coffee, his steps so quiet he barely disturbed the air. He sat beside her, wordless. For a while, neither spoke. Then, finally, Clara whispered, "I never thought it would feel like this." "Like what?" he asked. "Like the world was willing to let us stay." Eli didn't answer, but she didn't need him to. His fingers brushed hers, steady, present, enough. By noon, the riders had gone. Not with farewell speeches, but with nods, with glances that said more than any words could. The townsfolk watched them disappear into the horizon like a prayer carried by wind. And the baby now had 3 names, one given by Clara, one spoken by the Apache elder, and one whispered by Eli when no one else could hear. Weeks passed. The town changed, slowly but unmistakably. The church door no longer slammed when Clara walked by. The general store carried cornmeal gifted by the tribe. Kids played with toy arrows and wore feathers, not as mockery, but as mimicry, the kind only innocence can justify. Even the sheriff tipped his hat once. Clara still walked carefully. Scars didn't vanish overnight, but they no longer bled. One morning, she found Eli at the edge of their little pasture, hammering wood. 2 horses stood tethered nearby, their backs strong, their eyes gentle. She blinked. "Are we expecting company?" He shook his head. "We're going." Her breath caught. "Going?" He nodded toward the hills. "There's land. No one owns it. Just grass and sky. Enough for a cabin, a well, and room for more than just surviving." She looked down at her hands, then at the child, who now sat up, babbling at a feather he tried to bite. "I don't know if I can do it all again." "You don't have to," he said. "We'll do it together." She looked at him. The same eyes that once held silence like a shield now held it like a promise. A slow smile curved her lips.
And so they left, not in defiance, not in shame, but in quiet hope. The cart was small, their belongings even smaller, but their hearts somehow carried everything. At the edge of town, they paused. Clara turned back once, her gaze sweeping over the buildings, the church, the burned barn now rebuilt. She remembered every insult, every kindness, every moment when she thought she wouldn't make it. And then she whispered, thank you. Not to anyone in particular, just to the road, the wind, the journey. They rode into the hills where the sky turned wider and the trees forgot what side anyone was on. Years later, travelers would speak of a small homestead past the river bend, where 2 horses always waited by the gate, and a boy with mixed eyes ran barefoot through fields of wild rye. Some said the woman there had once been shot and left for dead. Others said she rose from the earth, carried by a man who never spoke much, but never let go. But those who stayed long enough would see what truly mattered. The way the man still looked at her when she laughed, the way she folded blankets with a tenderness that only loss could teach. And the boy, growing strong, half fire, half sky, learning to love a world that once feared his very breath. In the West, bullets travel fast, but love, if it's real, will always find its way back, even if it has to ride alone through 100 winds of dust.